That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons a podcast shall rise. H.P. Lovecraft, Weird Tales, Ramsey Campbell, Cthulhu, Laird Barron, Silent Hill, Brian Lumley, Dagon. There's something sinister out there in the cosmos, and the tendrils run deep throughout the universe. Only one woman dares to traverse the web. Mary SanGiovanni, who once again is up to cosmic shenanigans.
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. This is Mary SanGiovanni, and I am, as always, up to shenanigans of cosmic proportions. Now, this week, we're going to be talking about one of the collaborations that Lovecraft did with a writer from Somerville, Massachusetts named Hazel Heald. The story is called Out of the Aeons, and he did, if I'm not mistaken, about 5 stories that he collaborated with Hazel Heald on. Now, this story was first published in the April 1935 issue of Weird Tales magazine, and my understanding from different sources was that Heald wrote the first draft, at least, and Lovecraft substantially revised and rewrote it. A lot of his letters to Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith indicated that he basically wrote the story, that the draft that was submitted by Heald was not publishable, and that he did a lot of work in bringing it up to publishable standards. Her correspondences seem to contradict this. They seem to indicate otherwise, that she mentions that she had done 6 revisions on this story for him, and that usually if she could get her work to a point that was acceptable by Lovecraft, the editors would buy it. So there's some contradiction, I think, in how exactly this collaboration worked. But a lot of sources, most sources seem to indicate that she put together at least the idea of it, maybe the basic skeleton of it, and he fleshed out and fixed maybe what didn't work, and put a lot of his own spin, I think, on the particular story. So it is listed as a collaboration between the two of them. The story is in epistolary format. We are basically looking at papers of a deceased curator, Robert H. Johnson, Ph.D., from the Cabot Museum of Archaeology in Boston. Now, the basic premise of the story, it's very Lovecraftian. I mean, it would read, I think, as sort of an ode to Lovecraft's work if Lovecraft wasn't involved in it. That he is, it just seems that he's, expanding on, building on his own particular mythos. But these papers basically did talk about an acquisition of the museum of a mummy that was discovered in 1879 by a freighter captain who finds this island in the Pacific. And yes, if this sounds sort of Cthulhu-ish, there's probably reason for that. He finds this island in the Pacific, and within this temple, vaultish kind of place, he finds a crouching mummy, and by the mummy's body, a cylinder of a strange kind of metal, and within it, a scroll written on this odd membrane. These things are removed to the museum before the island sinks again into the ocean. Okay, so it's very sort of it's very much Cthulhu-ish in that regard, that this island comes up out of the sea every once in a while and goes back under. Makes you kind of wonder what is happening in the Pacific, that all these sunken cities are down there with monstrous things underneath. And speaking of monstrous things, we have the Cthulhu stand-in, which is Ghatanothoa. I hope I'm saying that right. Ghatanothoa is described as, quote, gigantic, tentacled, proboscidean. Okay, I apologize for not saying that right. I'm reading it off the text here, but gigantic tentacled, proboscidean, octopus-eyed, semi-amorphous, plastic, partly squamous, of course, and partly rugose, end quote. This is what the creature is that we're looking at. A true Lovecraftian monstrosity. Now, what's interesting about this particular monster, and throughout the story, there are things that are most definitely Lovecraft's signature. And then there are departures, which make me believe that maybe Hazel Heald, had more of a hand in writing this than history maybe gives her credit for, particularly because they are such departures from Lovecraft's formula. But particularly with this monster, we have this, he's one of the few that does interact with human beings. The legend is that an ancient civilization regarded this creature as a hostile god to whom they would sacrifice members of their community. I think it was 12 young people, 12 men and 12 young boys, 12 young men and 12 young women, that he would be sacrificed every year to this creature to keep it from crawling out of its subterranean, under-oceanish lair, I guess, to the heart of the city and crawling down this mountain to basically destroy this civilization. There were priests that were in charge of monitoring the movements of this being, this monstrous being, and keeping track of when the sacrifices needed to be made. And these people had immense power. Second only to the king, possibly even more powerful than the king. They could do anything. They were above the law. They were regarded almost as semi-gods themselves. And what we see with this being, the reason they were so afraid of him, was that to look on his face, to look on any part of him, would cause you to be petrified externally. You'd turn into this sort of partly leathery, partly stone type of thing, but only on the outside. Internally, your internal functions would continue on indefinitely. There's something so horrific to me about that idea. It's body horror and madness rolled into one, because your body is frozen. You are imprisoned in your own body, so you lose all control of that. And your mind is cut off from the physical senses, and continuing on indefinitely could go insane. And I think it speaks to that cosmic horror element of weakness and malleability of mankind, that essentially the constructs through which we define humanity, our physical senses, our intellectual and emotional and spiritual processing of those senses and the stimuli that we're getting from our various senses, that all of it is just a plaything to a capricious type of entity that may decide, and may not even have, a hostility at heart, but is just something so foreign and alien and terrifying that it is beyond, that it has this power to basically destroy the fiber of our being. It is not an unheard of concept. Biblically, in the Judeo-Christian Bible, the angels and demons are described that way too, that to look on a demon could cause madness, and that the angels, the reason that the shepherds and everybody were always so afraid of them, is that they had terrifying countenances. Now, that doesn't mean ugly countenances, but just that they inspired terror because they were something so far removed from humanity. Okay? So, we have this being, this Gatanathoa, who basically is a basilisk of cosmic proportions, and can turn people into these petrified beings. We have a lot of little connections to Lovecraft. And again, these could be Lovecraft's vanity, maybe, but I tend to think that maybe these were little nods by Hazel Heald to Lovecraft, in acknowledging the scope and the influence of his own particular mythos. And what I think is interesting is how they're characterized. We have several members of the Cthulhu mythos mentioned in the story. We have Shub-Niggurath, right, who is a for lack of a better way to say it, kind of a fertility goddess. She is described as being obscenely so, to the point of that it's not even about fertility. It's almost something perverse and grotesque in her production of offspring. But in this particular story, and again, I tend to think this may be the influence of perhaps a female writer, she is not considered an evil entity. She's not even considered an indifferent entity. The same with Yig, who is a serpent god of Lovecraft Circle, created by a member of Lovecraft Circle, who and these two particular deities are not considered they're not considered hostile to humankind. In fact, they may even be seen as benevolent, possibly, if not benevolent, then at least favorable to humanity. And again, that seems sort of a departure from Lovecraft's work, who I don't think, in his own mythology, never really differentiated between, say, good gods and bad gods, or gods who liked people and gods who didn't. It was more of a case of all of these entities exist. There are cults that are supportive of them because of, the things that they promised human beings in dreams. But for the most part, all of them are dangerous. They are wild, unpredictable, feral, cosmically powerful, dangerous entities. And yet in this particular story, it is the spells offered by these particular entities that inspire a scroll to be written which can ward off Ghatanothoa's power. And one of the young people, the young priests in this ancient society, Tiog decided that one way humanity could get out from under the thumb, so to speak, or the tentacle of Ghatanothoa, would be to use this particular scroll to ward off his power and to go to the center of its lair and rid humanity of this problem once and for all. Of course, we have the ancient priests who have made quite a cushy living and quite a comfortable living of being so prominent in society that, they're the only ones that interact with Ghatanothoa, and they're the ones who, are the be all and end all of decisions made about this. And even they couldn't talk the people. They didn't want any threat to their power. If there's no more Ghatanothoa, there's no more ancient priest cult of Ghatanothoa. So they're kind of looking out for number one. And you could say that their reaction to Tiog's idea is kind of evil. They can't even convince the king to dissuade Tiog from going. The king thinks this is a good idea. Everybody's on board. Everybody thinks this is a good idea. The priests try to tell the people, no, this is terrible. This is blasphemy. You're just going to make this thing angry. When in fact, they know that this spell will work. What they do is they sneak into Tiog's house, in the night, and they switch scrolls with something very close, but something that will not work against Gitanothoa. And they keep the real scroll, and they pass it down from generation to generation of priests, but they leave him unguarded, and they don't tell him. And he goes up to the mountain and never comes back. So we have, up to that point, a fairly Lovecraftian traditional sense of cults, but it changes, and we're going to come back to that later. If we look at other little nods to Lovecraft, and again, this could be Lovecraft's own, nods to himself, or it could be Hazel Heald's nods to him as a mentor and an inspiration. The first curator at the Cabot Museum is named Pickman, who, obviously sharing the name with the character in Pickman's model. One of the visitors to the museum is a strange man who calls himself Swami Chandraputra. Now, this is, according to a source I found, actually Randolph Carter, who we did a two-part series on a few weeks ago. Randolph Carter, as described in Through the Gates of the Silver Key, uses that alias after his mind is trapped in an alien body. And then another source says that this story helped to inspire the Zothic legend cycle of Lynn Carter. So there's a lot of Lovecraft Circle connectivity. And there is also Von Junt's Black Book, which is a prominent feature in this particular story, because a lot of the knowledge about what this scroll may contain that is found with this mummy is the linguists can't figure it out, the scientists can't figure it out, the archaeologists can't figure it out. It's the occultists that say, hey, this is a lot like this scroll that's mentioned in this legend, in this black book, this book of cults. So, either whether that's Lovecraft tying things into his own mythos, his own, Lovecraft circle, his friends tying their stuff in, as he has done in the past several times, or if this is Hazel Heald, just sort of, giving nods to the people who are inspiring and mentoring her. It's kind of neat little things. Like if you're into that sort of, connectivity, there are a lot of those little connections. Now, we also have the classic Lovecraft trope of being unable to forget what has been learned. This is also, I think, is very reflective of Call of Cthulhu, in that, the doctor, Dr. Johnson, the curator, mentions that he worries for his own life because he thinks he knows too much, and he thinks people are going to cause him harm because of what he knows, that several of the people involved in an incident at the museum with this mummy are now all dead. And of course, we know from the very beginning of the story that we're reading a posthumous, well, I guess it's a posthumous reading of papers that he prepared before he died of heart failure. So we have a bit of, of that sort of epistolary thing that Lovecraft is known for. And also that trope of, now that he knows his life is in danger, he can't unknow what he knows. What is interesting, though, is that there isn't any quest for knowledge, and there isn't any attempt at change, because I think if there was, then perhaps the basic conceit about the cults in the Pacific that still supposedly to this day are interested in this mummy, it wouldn't work. And again, this is perhaps maybe the strongest reason in my mind that one could argue Hazel Heald had more to do with this story than Lovecraft claims, particularly because it seems to depart from or defy Lovecraft's almost rigid distaste of cults, and there is a bit of racism here in the way he describes members of this particular Gitanothoa's cult. They're of course always swarthy, there are a lot of Hawaiian, Polynesian, Asiatic area. The people from these areas are all members of this particular cult in the Pacific. And the narrator has obvious prejudice and distaste for them, to the point where he keeps trying to, he's annoyed that even though the museum is now very popular because of this mummy and, very, well traveled now, that a lot of people are coming to see this mummy. It's almost all these foreigners, and these sort of brown people from the Pacific that he believes are somehow bringing down the classy atmosphere of this small, quiet little archaeology museum. So there's Lovecraft's racism is right there. But what's interesting is that if you look at the series of events, particularly the event which is the main, I guess, climax or conceit of the story, is that various people keep trying to break in and interact with the mummy. Now, as far as Johnson's concerned, these people are just, criminal type cultists who want the mummy for some nefarious purpose, who are, looking for trouble, but what we see in the culminating event is that the two people who break in, I think one is Hawaiian and one is Filipino. I think basically, we have two cult members who come in and they try to access the mummy. They cut a hole in the glass, and what they find is that one of these people has died of fright. The other one has been petrified. Okay? And the one who's died of fright happens to have a scroll. Okay? Now, if you remember the legend that we were just talking about, there were two scrolls. There was the one that was found with the mummy, and then there was the real one. So now we have a good understanding of who the mummy is, and honestly, of what the cultists have been trying to do. If you think about it, despite the prejudice and this disdain that Johnson has and his attempts to prevent this from happening, the cultists seem to be trying to offer the mummy a mercy, like a kindness, in freeing him of his prison. If he is Tiyag, then he was trying to save the world, and he has been imprisoned in his petrified body for thousands of years. And he has to be insane by now. He has to be so far beyond the torture of that is even conceivable for any human being, that they just want to lay him to rest, basically. They want to bring rest to the man who tried to save the world. The modern cultists seem to be trying to do something good. And I find that sort of fascinating because, again, as I said, cults figure so prominently into Lovecraft's work, and often into cosmic horror in general. And I always find it interesting when they take an element of a trope, really, of Lovecraft's and do something different with it. And here's something that, depending on who you believe, either Lovecraft or Hazel Heald upended of Lovecraft's own trope, that in a sense, Johnson's kind of a bad person, because he was just going to leave this poor man on display indefinitely, and the cultists are the ones trying to say, no, like this man has been suffering, and we want to put an end to that suffering. And I think that's kind of a neat aspect in this particular story, and in some of the modern cosmic horror that we've looked at, where we actually humanize the cultists and try to explore why they may be giving so much power to these ancient gods, and what they get out of it, and what they need to do in order to redefine their own significance, especially under the shadow of knowing or believing wholeheartedly that these entities exist and have cosmic godlike power. So anyway, that's it for this week. If you want to hear past, present, or future episodes of Cosmic Shenanigans, you can find them any place that podcasts are available: iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all that. Thanks again to Matt Wilderson for engineering. Pick up his book, Horrors Untold, his new book, and give that a read. It's got some cosmic horror in it. And I will see you next week. Bye.
Cosmic Shenanigans. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Cosmic Shenanigans is written and produced by Mary SanGiovanni. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com.